Okay, so let's cover composition to the best of my abilities. I feel like composition can be split up into a lot of things, so we'll be doing environments for this one. Uh, let's see, where do we start with that? I find that environments are like a pretty good way to like, get into composition because environments are pretty forgiving, especially like natural environments, say uh, hills and cliffs and whatnot. Like go for those kind of things, and I think it's pretty easy to like gradually just build up your repertoire of understanding when it comes to composition. It's a bit different for characters. I think a lot of the things that you'll pick up when it comes to composition in nature will transition well into characters, but not necessarily in the other way around. Um, and yeah, so let's cover. I wrote down some points that I wanted to talk about, starting with everyone's favorite. I don't like the canvas size, but anyway, so the rule of thirds. I don't think these aren't good thirds, but let's get on with it. So the rule of thirds states that like in these intersections, if you split everything into three, you get four intersections, which are the hotspots. Like they're good points to place the focal points of the image. But I think it goes a little bit more like don't just use one of them. It's good to like use multiple ones of them. So if you have something that's interesting here, then probably balance it out by putting something here. Uh, and so on and so forth. Like these are all your tools. Like all 4 points are important. And I think like the range of the focal points themselves should be probably around here. Like they are pretty big. They cover a lot of it, and most of it just tells you not to put things here. Like avoid the oh, that's not a good brush. Avoid putting stuff in the far corners unless there's a very specific reason for it. I don't think that's worth your time trying to justify having something outside of this spot. Like that. So basically, like everything that's in within the black area here is probably not worth using at all. You can sort of bring things in. It's like this is the part that's probably going to get vignetted if you're using a vignette, and so just keep that in mind. That most of the interesting points will be in here within this zone, and most likely it's going to not quite be in one of these quadrants. It's probably more or less going to cover like maybe three of them is a good like estimate. Like maybe you put it here, right? That's a good spot to put everything, right? Same goes for here. And if it's something big, then you would probably cover multiple ones and keep one open just to get a better like distribution. You don't want if you cover all of them, then there's no composition at all, technically speaking. Uh, but it's like yeah, this oval thing here, you could probably just squish it into the middle and cover all four of them, which works really well if you're going for like a symmetrical composition. But then you can unbalance that by putting stuff in the corners, and now boom, it's no longer symmetrical, right? Okay, so now that we covered that, everyone knows, most people know the rule of thirds, which also there's also like this, what is it? I forgot what its name, but like the golden rectangle thing, which goes like that. I think it's like if you split it in half, right? No, give me the back. The hard brush again. If you split it in half multiple times like this, you would at some point reach. I think it's something like this, right? Like it keeps going towards the center, and then like you cut the halves. Oh, it was supposed to go in here. Oh, never mind. But anyways, yeah, it sort of lines up around that quadrant or like the one of those intersection from the rule of thirds. I don't think there's like a very good reason to like dive too deep into the golden curve or whatever because it sort of fills the same role. And what it does is like it helps you sort of grab and grab a lot of these points together. Like this, you are technically using all of this space, right? So you are using 3 points as stated prior. So I think you can get away with just thinking of these points as a collective thing. That like this is your composition. Multiple like these points are the composition points where you will probably anchor most of your attention to. Uh, but they are sort of within this circle. So maybe we'd have something in this corner here, and then something up here that is maybe in the far top right or something like that. It doesn't have to be in the center. Moving on to okay, so now that we've gone over those, I'm going to talk about curves. There's like this thing between like using curves versus straight lines in your composition, and I think curves are probably the more powerful one, whereas because you can sort of bring your bring the viewer into the picture, but also lead them around, like lead them through the picture rather than just straight to the focal point. So that would be the difference between the straight versus the what is this? Let's get rid of oops. Let's get rid of those. Um, so if I were to draw like something simple, like a mountainside, I don't think this is particularly appealing. But yeah, like this is pretty common, I think. This gives some depth. It's good enough. Okay, this wasn't that good. Okay, seems like I wasn't that prepared to draw something. I didn't think about that. I just have a couple of notes that I wanted to address. Um, Now with this, it's like you could do things and be very direct and be like, oh, we're supposed to be looking here, so I'm going to make a bunch of like very straight lines that lead towards it, like this, maybe, kind of like this. Like, yeah, you can see the road. Um, and sure, you are looking here. We are capturing like multiple points, right? But you like this thing is like very direct. The viewer will look immediately straight to this point. Like you're just reinforcing that this is where you want them to look and nowhere else. And since you were doing environments, and I think this is like for everything really, like all kinds of designs, it is better to use curves, in my opinion, because then you will sort of show off more of everything. So in this case, maybe I would use a curve to go like this. Like we're going to the same point, but we are taking a bit of a, what do you call, like a longer path there. Yeah, something like that. So we're going to the same place essentially. Like you could continue the curve since we're doing a path here. Um, but like we're going to the same place, but now you're forcing them through the entire image. Now you could put stuff here if you wanted to. You can decorate to the best of your ability, but it's still like going to be more efficient at showcasing the entire design. So for the sake of simplifying this, I'm just going to call it curves because curves and curved lines in general are going to help you pass through the aforementioned rule of thirds, right? If you go from one point to another here, I don't know why I drew it that way, but if I want to go from here to here, let's call them something. Okay, so if I want to go from point C to B, the fastest way is just straight across, right? A better way to do it would probably be to sort of if you start from D and then you curve into it, so you start like from the bottom below D, sort of like now you're being forced into the image, you're moving with the image uh, into like the far back of the image, depending on how you're doing this. You're moving with the image, and then we're pushing it back towards D. It's like even if we left it, we can come back now. So now you get like sort of if you think of a race car going really quickly here, it would splash like if there was water here, right? If there was water, oh no, that's not blue. If there was water here, then if the racing car, I'm gonna use a red shape here. If the racing car comes in here, uh, it would then splash like some of that water here, right? If it hits it, like this is the direction it splashes, which means that in theory, our attention will be also sort of splashed a little bit here. So depending on what you put here, if it's interesting enough, you can lead them further away into having something to look at, depending on what you put there. You don't have to. You could put a resting spot, or you use this space because now you're looking up here, right? But depending on where the focal point actually is, so say if B is the focal point, like first of all, we're leading the person to it. We're leading the viewer to the focal point. And now we have all these other hotspots of things you could, like where you could put stuff. Uh, this place, since you are curving past it twice, we will have the opportunity to see it multiple times, and therefore you don't need to add as much to it. Whereas this one here, you're not necessarily going to arrive at unless you create some shape here that brings it all together. So in this case, I'm not gonna draw it out because it's gonna take too long. But if you imagine this as being like a racing track, then this would probably be like this is a good spot to sort of just have the sky be, right? Or I don't know, right? Maybe you don't agree with me, but this is a good spot I think to put something that is sort of um, more or less neutral. So maybe clouds. Maybe clouds would work here, right? And then you create a shape that reinforces the composition of the piece. And that's sort of how I think about using curves, just to demonstrate how this is applicable when it comes to character designs. Uh, this is a like a pose I like to draw. It's like when you have the character sort of looking down at you. And then in this position, you can use a curve that goes like this. And I personally think it looks pretty cool. You don't have to agree with me, but it's got a lot of attitude, and it lets you. It's easy. Like if you studying like I think it's called like the flow of action or something like line of action. I think it's called. Um, where it's like this is the line that goes through it, and then the secondary. Usually people would just think of like what are the complementary shapes. Like I don't think does this count? It's something like this. There's like a way you could approach that. Um, but if you think of it as the sort of like the force that comes with having this shape, that means it will splash out here and it will splash out here. So depending on what you do here with the arms, like for example, if you have an arm that goes like that, that would make sense. It enforces and goes with it. Whereas this one here maybe does something like that. And it still makes sense because it splashes out. And that's sort of how you would use that composition within the character itself. And depending on how you put that in uh, within the entire of the piece. Like if it's this strong of a composition within, like if it's this strong of flow line, then it will probably affect the rest of the piece, and you would probably have to accommodate for it with the environments. But that's enough about characters because we're talking about environments. Going back to the the curves. So all of these are, since I already touched upon, let's make something. I'm gonna probably speed this up as I try to figure out what it is that I want to draw for this. Hmm. I think I think I saw a video on like what is it, Jordan Grimmer who did the yeah I think this works. Let's just do something similar to what he did. Well, I don't want to do the exact same. That would be kind of. Let's do this. So there are some things I'm not gonna touch upon too much, which is perspective, because perspective kind of it's sort of like you can read up on it and you would probably get all the information you need. There aren't that many tricks to it. Most of them are kind of like, oh, just remember how the horizon line works. And sure, if you want to get fancy with like 2 point, 3 point perspectives, you could. 2 point is kind of helpful here, whereas 3 point is more like if you want to get fancy or you're looking for a specific angle. I think a 1 point perspective is a good place to start for this. Um, let's see. I kind of wanted to do something that's sort of like I want to curve something. Let's go like this. Granted, I'm just kind of thinking of a curved shape that I like that sort of captures a large piece of the image. Now we have this sort of awkward split here where half of the image, like it splits perfectly in half, so maybe consider moving it up or down. I'm gonna squish it a little bit so we get a bit more into that, like sort of this is 1/3, this is 1/3, this is 1/3, this is 1/3. Uh, Here, since okay, so this one is going, the curve is going this way, right? So that means will probably end up somewhere here. Like it's very unlikely that I'll go like that. That's not very balanced, I think. Uh, Depends on how you pull it off. Of course, you could keep going and then sort of end up here. But I think here it feels like we're going to end up having a big shape here, probably having something in focus here, uh, with some supporting shapes in these areas. Most of that just kind of comes naturally. Like if you do it a lot, you can feel your way through it. So if I were to think, uh, this looks like a good place to have cliffs. That's kind of what I'm feeling here. I am sort of inspired by that one piece that I sort of didn't want to copy by Jordan Grimmer. Um, and these curves, like if you place them next, I will touch upon this more later, but if you place the curves next to each other, they sort of just create nice shapes by themselves as long as you don't draw them parallel all the way. If you just vary the size a little bit, you will get, it'll sort of do the work for you. So just leave it like that, maybe add another one, uh, let him expand and contract as you sort of like in an almost random way, kind of like ribbons in a way. It's like a ribbon twisting and turning in perspective. So this is the area I'll be using for, that will be the ground, and this is going to be like the zone where it transitions from um, a like a path, a beaten path, and start progressively getting rocker, and this is where it starts. Since we're doing this curvature, I'm going to add something that is sort of playing into that. This shape I think is good. Uh, let's see. Okay, so chances are there's probably going to be something that goes up this way. I think, like, if this is a cliff like this, right? Um, we're probably going to have another wall here. This one will probably look pretty good if it curved around as well like that. But now it, okay, that one doesn't touch where I want it to. So let's shorten it. Now it feels like it's further back, right? I'm not gonna, as I said, I'm assuming that you know some things about perspective to begin with, uh, because otherwise we're just going to have like this class is going to be very basic, and I feel like kind of redundant in the sense that you could probably look it up and get the answers you're looking for way faster that way. Okay, let's move this around a little bit. See if this one, I think this position is a little bit better, a little bit stronger. The canvas is not optimal for this. I think if you want to get real technical about it, probably look into getting like a more widescreen canvas. I just picked whatever Photoshop said was their default. Uh, so bear with me with that. Maybe this one should be going up. Okay. Now this thing is like going around this corner, I think. I think something like this is pretty good. Yes. I'm quite happy with this. It's sort of jank in some positions, but I think most of it can sort of be like, you can trim it down, you can fix it. Maybe, wait, no, where's the other one? Maybe going, yeah, now that thing is sort of lining up a little bit better with the third spot, which was around this area, um, whereas this one does not anymore. Now it's very centered, and I don't think that is uh, something to strive for. Like, try to not make it too centered, no matter what it is that you do, unless you are going for that specific composition. It's like, I guess that is the sort of a way to see it. It's like the rule of thumb would maybe be something along the lines of, I will not put anything here, like specifically here. That's not going to be the focal point, unless that is exactly what I was intending for, uh, intending for the piece to be. Otherwise, don't bother putting anything there because it's just going to sort of kind of bother you, I think. It's going to like needlessly complicate it since you're not going for that composition initially. But feel free to try it out though. Yes, I think this is. I don't know where I'm going with this, to be honest. Okay, what did we have? Okay, so going into leading lines. Okay, let's lower that one. So since we have established that we're going to use this curved shape here, maybe this one should be like that. We're doing this curved shape here, and it's going to lead up into this point, sort of. Uh, we now have this area, which is like the big splash zone of that curve, uh, and then this area, which is sort of also. Um, so now we're going to talk about leading lines, which in this case, since I chose to do cliffs, is sort of easy to do because you can just kind of follow the shapes and you will kind of get some cliff-y shapes for it. I don't know, is that, would you call it that? Right now I'm just kind of following the shapes. Uh, and I think to some degree you will be able to find, I think using these kind of S-curved shapes is like it's a cheap way to do it, but it's also very effective. And I've seen a lot of, uh, I think, I don't know if it's like Disney, but a lot of like high-end production using it because of how easy it is to just get things that look like rocks using it. Okay, so here I think connecting this part here is probably going to be a bit tricky, but that I don't know. Maybe it's not that difficult. Like if you design the rocks around it, like these rocky shapes to sort of support uh whatever it is that you're doing, and you can break up shapes. So like in this case, I don't feel like I could realistically get these rocks to sort of fit into that curvature. That's a strange looking rock. But what you can do is you can place multiple ones using the big, medium, small theorem, like as such, kind of something like that. And now these three together create the shape for it. Like it does help reinforce it a little bit, because those together, multiple shapes together can create the rhythms that you are looking for. I don't know if that one needs to have a small one. I'm gonna put a small one there. It's fine. Doing the same for the other side. Um, okay, so since we had this curve here, I think this is a bit wide. I think it probably benefits more from being, if we push it in a little bit. We push it down, maybe that's the better. Excuse me while I turn the canvas. Makes it a little bit easier to draw certain curves. Yeah, something like that maybe. And then once again, like we're doing the whole thing with these shapes. Um, Now in this case, I'm inclined to believe, since I curved the top like that, I'm sort of inclined to believe uh, that most of these lines are going to push downwards into this spot, which I'm not completely sure if that is the correct way to approach this one. I think this is like it's a cylindrical shape, right? So this one curves back up again, which is maybe not optimal for explaining this, but it does the job. Um, One way to, in this case, like when you have a shape like this that is kind of, it's too big for its own good and you need to split it up somehow, then, well, what do you know? Just do it, right? Just grab this thing, expand it somewhat, and then kind of maybe something like this. Just make a sort of cliff within it. Or what is this called? Like you split the rock wall, anyways. In this case, maybe make sure the lines don't line up as well, so you kind of get that sense of it curving around. And well, to top it off, maybe let's add a big rock here. I don't end the shapes right before, if you can. if you can avoid it, then perhaps add some smaller shapes or something, just to break it up so you don't end up having things that go and end right before the end of the canvas. Sort of like that thing what I was talking about, like with the vignetting, uh, how this zone, like everything outside here, don't put stuff there. What you ideally would like to do is to put stuff around it that sort of frames everything, so that it feels like the image continues to extend, or that the image shrinks and you're sort of compressed within that area instead. Like either or, but don't put stuff at the very ends of it. Hmm. This image has like this one issue right now, which is the size. Like this, to me at least, doesn't feel very large. I don't. I The scale is kind of off. So the way I will approach this is to add some smaller details in the background, because we have some large details here close to us, like these rocks. So we know vaguely how large things are. So if I were to put more rocks here, it should feel like they're very far away. Or if I'm doing this wrong, it should feel like they're just very small rocks and you see them on a distance. Um, but I think that is maybe these rocks actually are too big. That is a possibility. Maybe they are screwing a little bit with us. Still like that. That looks like a rock to me. Uh, these rocks as well can help reinforce the curvature of the image if you want to. Um, if you are doing a like a canyon scene like this is sort of shaping up to be, I do recommend using them as such, because it is sort of just free. Like it helps you just render them out and it looks like it's coherent. Everything looks like it belongs together. Hmm. You know what? I'm going to break here. And there's no real reason why I chose to do it specifically there. I didn't like this area as much, so I just wanted to break it apart a little bit. In this stage of like the sketching, I think you're pretty much free to do whatever you want, because you should at this point kind of already have most of the things that you would need to have done. Like you know what all the components of the image are. Everything you add now are going to reinforce the composition to some degree. Um, like we're as I said, like we're going to right now we're in a state where you kind of need to accommodate the focal point to the best of your ability using things such as layering and big, medium, small. Um, and like this isn't. If you look at these columns here, they're not really using the big, medium, small very well. So if I split this one up like maybe something like this, now I have this one is the big, this is the medium, this is small. What more can we do with it? We could kind of push it out a little bit maybe, so it feels like it's slightly different from the rest. Maybe this one is like it's indented like that. That looks kind of interesting to me. Split it up further. Can add some interesting details and shapes. These ones as well kind of also follow the big, medium, small. Oh no, wait, no, not yet. I was about to add value to that, but maybe not yet. Let's save that for later. Um, I'll do the same thing here. It kind of feels right, I guess. Something like that. So right now, the sort of shapes that we got going is we have this large shape here. Just purely talking about shapes. This area, um, and we have the foreground, which has one big shape in it, which is that. And if I were to fill those in with colors, let's see what that looks like. Let's take blue for the sky. Those. Lower the opacity so we can see what's going on. Blue for the sky. Let's use orange because that's kind of what I associate with these kinds of rocks for the well, the mountains. Excuse me if the color is a bit harsh. I just wanted to read. Use a lighter color for the path itself. I'm going to mask, just use the lasso tool for this because it takes too long otherwise. Something like that. And I think this distribution of shapes is quite okay. Uh, However, the blue and the beige part are quite similar in size. And I think that is something worth noting. So it's probably going to be in our interest to sort of add maybe some rocks and some pebbles here that are going to be sort of shrinking that size and bringing more of it back to the grandest one, which is the cliffs themselves. Um, and maybe like you could sort of fade it in a little bit more, kind of like that. I'm not gonna use this. This was just meant to check like the shapes and stuff. Uh, there are some things I will add before moving too far forward. One of those being I want to see some clouds, mostly because I think they're fun to paint, and they do add a little bit of like free composition power. I think maybe I don't know what kind of clouds would look the best here. They also do help reinforce size depending on how you paint them. So if in this case, maybe I think I would like a lot of detail for these clouds. So let's just imagine that there'll be a lot of bumps um, on these bad boys right here. I haven't fully decided on like how I want that to look and how I want to do that, but I think right now it sort of like helps bring it down into its this swoop feeling. Granted, I'm not a master at this, so who knows what it looks like to you. Maybe it doesn't look as good. It's a bit on the nose, but that's fine. It's just to demonstrate some of the thoughts I have when I do compositional things. Let's see, what is next? Right. Still have to accommodate the focal point, which was around here. I think this step of like accommodating the focal point, which now kind of shifts down into this spot here because everything is pointing into it. At this stage, it is difficult unless there's specific things you would like to add to the piece. So if I wanted to add more rocks, then I could do that. But at the same time, it's not going to inherently do that much for us just yet. Although it does make it look a bit more nice. I'm adding a little bit more detail before moving on. Depending on what your workflow looks like, you might not want to do that. Maybe you just want to stop, or maybe you're like sort of what do you call it? Like just painting away and finding all the shapes that way, like sort of carving into it, which is totally fine. Uh, it's more you just have to put everything into practice in your own way. Since I just happen to do it a different. This looks promising, I think. You know, would be kind of interesting. What if there was just water here? I'll look into that in a sec. I think that could be pretty cool. So how do I want to proceed here? Um, so in this state, now it's like oh, we're going to do it in values, right? It's pretty straightforward. Like the sky is probably going to have a. I don't want to go with like a pure white for the sky. I feel like that kind of limits. If you go for pure whites or pure blacks, it's always a bit different to get a lot of variety, I think. Um, but we do know that these parts are probably going to be the darkest, right? Because they are the closest to us. That's how values work. Then the one that comes here is probably a bit, like it's not as dark, it's still kind of dark probably. And I would assume that this place is like split, so it's not completely dark. This kind of sucks. I shouldn't have taken, I shouldn't have done this kind of shape, I think. Okay, well, you know what, it kind of worked out. It is not ideal. Maybe if I just use a different brush to sort of blend it into, oh no, give me that. Sort of blend it into the other one. Yeah, something like this. Maybe this is better. This one is like it's transitioning so much throughout the piece that it kind of goes for all these. Like they're transitioning so much from light to dark because of the curvature that we kind of end up having multiple values featured at the same time, which makes it a little bit more difficult to control them properly. But it is what it is. Like what can you do? I think if you're painting away, like I'm doing like everything in one lane, then soft brushes are pretty damn OP. You can just get the values where you want them. I'm thinking, what if there was like a light that came down here? Um, so I am going to block out this as such. And I think it will be kind of like a very hard edge to that lighting. Let's start like, no, that was the wrong way. Kind of like that, I think. Let's lower the opacity of this thing. Yes, this is good. I think the light would probably hit this thing a bit harder, so. In some pieces, I have seen like, oh, what if the light was coming down like in here as well? What if it just, there was some light hitting through there, right? And then you could be like super graphic about it and just add a really hard white chunk like that. That is not a bad idea, I think. Right, let me do some more. Like this. Kind of like that. I think that's like a thing you could do. I don't know if I actually will. Um, you know, I think this is a bit overkill. There will be some like sort of light leaking over here at the top because like it's the edges. But other than that, I think that's like good enough for what we're trying to achieve here. So now we're getting to this state where like we're kind of just trying to build up. Did I put that on? Okay, whatever. We're just merging it down now because I messed that up. We're building up detail at this stage. It's like because we already got our composition sort of going here. We don't need to think too much about it anymore, other than the fact that it's just been established. I feel like I'm just rambling here. I don't know what I'm talking about. Now that we have all our values down, there's this thing that I think we could just refer to it for the sake of simplicity as like everything at once. So try, and what that basically means is like we want to try to bring up the detail of all the various layers of depth at the same time, because as you get closer to the foreground, you kind of find that you might find that it's a bit difficult to manage the level of detail. So if you do everything at once, you'll gradually just stop. Like, so, okay, if I do, uh, say I'm going to start with the background, right? Maybe there's going to be something here. Maybe we can see a bit of like the cliffs in the back. That seems plausible. Let's see here. Can we get a bit more like harsher white here so we can see it more clearly? I don't think I'll be covering rendering at all, or like maybe a little bit, I don't know, by the end, but probably not that much just because it's such a wide topic that I feel like it's better to just address that in uh, from a material to material basis. But generally speaking, oh, why does the zoom work so strangely? Um, Generally speaking, I think if you approach everything as if it were clay, um, and then bring up the detail that way first, it should simplify the amount of steps you need to sort of figure out what the material looks like. So in this case, I am going to treat, okay, thankfully this happens to be rock, but I am going to treat it as if it was clay and just think about like what do you call them? Like the various faces of the object. So yeah, this is like, these parts are going to be in dark, uh, whereas some other parts are going to be in light. Maybe this place here has like a hard edge that we can see. Uh, but be mindful, this is pretty far back. It's meant to look like it's pretty far away from us. So don't go too hard on like the contrast of the details. It still has to read as if it was far away. For how long have I been doing this now? I'm just gonna check. 44 minutes. Okay, I think this is kind of. I don't want this to be longer than an hour. No matter what the final like edit, the final cut end up being, I don't want it to be that long. Because I think these cliffs over here have reached a pretty decent level of detail. I don't think we need to add more. Um, if anything, like maybe it's too much. It's probably dark in here. That looks like a dark spot where light doesn't reach fully. It's very bright. There's like maybe some god rays coming down, covering some of the background. Can't really see it. Um, Depending on how you work, if you are doing it like a painterly way, which we happen to do now, you can think of atmospheric depth at this stage already, and just maybe bring in a soft brush and sort of just make things push them back into the background by reducing the level of detail. If you aren't, then if you're doing it layer by layer, you could consider just detailing everything up if in case you think you might need it, and then just remove detail as you get closer to final. I think some of the light will kind of end up wrapping into those cliffs. I think it's like I'm saying I think that is because I'm not looking at any sort of reference images right now. Um, it's sort of like I'll decide what these rocks look like on my own this time. Like usually you would probably research them a little bit, like, oh, I am going to do this kind of cliff, these kind of rock walls. Maybe I need to know exactly how they work before I start doing them. Um, if it's like a specific client work, or there's a specific target they're going for. But if you're just doing it for yourself, you're free to just kind of let the compositioning stuff that I went over, and I hopefully there's like this is not the only resource you're using, right? You have a you're watching some other stuff, reading some art books or something that will cover the topic more in depth, and this kind of just fills hopefully it fills in some blanks. And at the very least it doesn't ruin any like knowledge that you've already amassed. That's like that would be the worst part. I really hope that isn't the case. I hope this doesn't go against anything you've learned and that it can be used together with it. Wait, no, there's not gonna be a light hitting these rocks. Maybe a little bit, but not enough for this to be warranted. When you're doing like the value painting stage, if you're doing it this particular way, uh, do keep in mind that like the contrast is going to be everything. Where there's harsh contrast, harsh edges, um, that's where you'll see things. Like that's where you'll see the details. Meaning that even if it's close in value, like if you're doing a pretty light gray versus a different shade of light gray, if you take the darkest one you have and the lightest one you have, then you will still be able to like if this is the brightest one that I have and this is the darkest one that I have, if I put this here, now it will look really bright. Use that to your advantage if there's anything you need to define by using just a slightly darker hue like that. Like now that rock stands out a bit more. I don't know if it should be standing out that much, um, but it can if I wanted to. Kind of looks a bit doomed here. I don't know. Don't zoom in that much. That's not a good idea. When you're doing environments, I think staying zoomed out for as long as possible is going to be your greatest asset. Anyways, now that we're closing in on like the foreground, this is probably the place where you put in like the most effort into the detailing. Just because this is what people will be able to see. This is like where you can put a lot of detail. This isn't like like a set in stone, funny joke, thing where you have to make it that way. It kind of sort of it'll naturally be a lot of detail in the foreground unless you're blurring it out intentionally with like Gaussian blur or something. Uh, but most of the times, like it's going to be a lot of detail in the foreground and detail where there is light or dark, depending on what you're using. Like if you're using like super over out, is it called overblown? Like if you've blown out light, uh, then the bright spots will just kind of be, oh, here is white, and the light is hitting here as well, and it is hitting here, kind of like that. Then those would be then you're using lights as graphical shapes instead. But if you're like in this case, I am using the dark spots more or less. So some of these things will not be seen properly. Like it'll be kind of like well dark graphical shapes. So I'm going to approach it that way and carve out and merge some of the shadows together just so we can get those big shapes here in the background. Uh, do still keep in mind like the big, medium, small thing. It always comes in handy when you're dealing with uh, creating shapes that are like sort of for shadows and light shapes. I think the big, medium, small theorem is very, very helpful if you're doing them for imagination and don't want to think too much about it. I don't know if I like that or not, but it serves the purpose well enough. Uh, since the spot right here still is kind of like it's not that detailed, I am going to add some more of these. If you just draw a bunch of lines uh, like this, one of them or a few of them are probably going to overlap and look like they have more contrast or whatever, and then you can just lean into those, make those spots like, oh, this I like, this is the one I want to keep, kind of like that. And at the same time, hide the other ones that you didn't like. That's a pretty fast way to get as much of this done as possible without having to think. I feel like that's a good position to be in. If you don't have to think while you work, then you can probably get a lot more like in terms of rendering done. So if you can minimize the time you need to think uh, by doing good prep work or having methods that allow you to shorten the time taken in certain stages, that's going to be a very good tool to invest like effort into developing or figuring out, depending on like, I don't know if you're going to be using another someone else's method or if you have your own, but those are going to be really important for doing these kinds of paintings, I think. I think this is going to be like a bit of a stylization choice where I add a little bit more brightness here into this corner and then darken the curvature just so we can get a stronger sense of that edge. Kind of like that. It is not completely like realistic. Maybe we'll bring back some of that, just smudge it back in. Something like that maybe. I think that way we can at least see it a bit more clearly. This is looking surprisingly good, not gonna lie. I wasn't expecting it to look remotely as good as this. This one at least I don't feel too bad about showing and talking about. I'm a long way off from being able to do like a good set of, oh actually this is a good spot. Like okay, so I think you could be we could be a bit more like direct about it, say like, oh, there's no light hitting here, just dark here, and then leave most of the light to that zone over here, kind of like that, something like that. Unfortunately, I merged. Oh, we still have that sketch, but I merged the other one away because I ruined it. Where do we put this? On very low opacity. No, that's not worth it. Maybe it is. I don't know. That's not too bad. It kind of looks good. Not, yeah, I'm not gonna be torched, but we're not gonna use that. Let's see what is left here. Maybe there could be some more dark shadows within the clouds, so that they stand out a little bit more. I'm gonna use a different brush here. I think when it comes to brushes, they do help a lot if you have the brushes that kind of do what you need them to. Um, so either get like a good brush pack with some nice textured brushes that could really help um, the detailing phase because, well, I don't know why I'm explaining that part, but I feel like doing environments kind of, unless you're doing the ones that look, unless it's a specific style, I think having textured brushes is always going to be what you'd want. I don't see why you wouldn't want it. Kind of like that. I don't think the depth in this piece is the greatest. I think it leaves a lot to be desired. Um, actually, there's a lot of things that it leaves a lot to be desired in a lot of ways. Um, but I think that covers most of what I wanted to talk about. Uh, it was surprisingly difficult. I mean, I knew it was going to be difficult talking while drawing, but it turned out to be even more difficult than I thought. I was planning on using the lasso tool more to just group things in, and then somehow I ended up with this composition that I somehow always end up in. It's always this one. It's always like a canyon. I don't know what's up with that. Let's use overlay, I think is a pretty solid one, and then just use spray paint in some more value stuff. Darken the foreground a little more maybe. Add that vignette that I was talking about. Like this should help bring it all together somewhat. Maybe this should be normal actually. I changed my mind. Okay. Let's do some not so fancy post processing. Technically speaking, working on the foreground even more and bringing it up like the detail even further could potentially like enhance this image to like even higher levels. Um, Actually, now I can go through the what the client thing looks like. Let's see. We are going to use sharpen, smart sharpen. Quite didn't quite look the way I thought it was going to look. Yeah, I mean it looks more interesting, I think. Okay, well let's call it a day here. This is what we ended up with. I think. Oh, stop zooming like that. Why does it always do that? What we ended up with is how do I put this? We still have like the original shapes, kind of like what is this curvature here is still here, right? We're still doing this. It's reinforced by this thing. I added one more here just for good measure. Um, and we still have this thing going in here. All the lines are supporting it, so we're still being sort of, it's not fully, but most of it is like carrying us back to this area here, with most of the detail being centered in this space here, um, which makes sense because we're coming around with this curve. It's splashing upwards to the top here, where these further backs us into this with where the highest point of contrast is basically, which is we have this dark area here, and then there's a lot of brightness here. This one here kind of just ended up being a bonus that I didn't think about, and that's it.